The air in courtroom 3B was thick and heavy, filled with the quiet stress of people whose lives were about to change. For Ethan Cole, it felt like he was drowning. He stood before the judge's bench, gripping the wooden rail so hard his knuckles were white. Every little sound was amplified: the buzz of the lights, the rustle of papers, the soft tap of a pen. But the only sound that mattered was the steady breathing of the man who held his future in his hands. Judge Harrison. The judge looked like he was carved from stone and law books, his face a mask of stern neutrality. He had silver hair and a brow that was always furrowed, like he was carrying the weight of every judgment he'd ever made. His eyes, magnified by his glasses, seemed to see right through you. They scanned Ethan, taking in his worn-out shirt, his trembling hands, and the exhaustion so deep in his face, it looked like it was part of him. "Mr. Cole," the judge's voice boomed, completely lacking in warmth. It was a voice made for delivering sentences, not comfort. "You're here today facing a number of offenses. Multiple unpaid parking tickets, a citation for a faulty vehicle, specifically a broken taillight, and most seriously, driving with a suspended license." Ethan swallowed hard. A cold dread filled his throat, making it hard to speak. He desperately wanted to explain. He wanted to tell them the parking tickets were from the street outside his second job, where he couldn't afford to park legally. That the taillight was broken because he had to choose between a $70 repair and his son's school lunches for the week. That he drove with a suspended license because his first job was a long bus ride away. But his second job, the one that kept them from being evicted, was impossible to get to on public transport after 10 p.m. He wanted to explain that he wasn't a criminal, he was just poor. But in the cold, hard language of the court, his reasons just sounded like excuses. Judge Harrison was famous for believing that your circumstances didn't give you a pass to break the law. All he saw was the black and white print on the papers in front of him, which told a story of a man who was negligent and defiant. "This isn't just a simple mistake, Mr. Cole. This is a pattern," the judge said, his stare getting harder. "It's a pattern that shows a complete disregard for your responsibility as a citizen and for the rule of law. The state is recommending jail time, and frankly, I'm inclined to agree." Jail. The word hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. It wasn't the idea of a cold cell that scared him. It was the image that flashed in his mind. His 7-year-old son, Leo, his little face confused and scared as a social worker, told him his daddy wasn't coming home. Leo was his entire world. He was the reason Ethan worked 2 jobs that crushed his spirit, the reason he got up every morning. The thought of being separated from him, of Leo ending up in foster care, the pain was so sharp he almost buckled right there on the cold floor. The judge's gavel was about to fall, and his fate felt sealed by a system that had no room for mercy. He was about to lose everything. Ethan Cole's life was held together by 2 things: exhaustion and love. It was all for his son, Leo. Their world was a small 2-bedroom apartment that usually smelled like burnt toast and the oil from Ethan's work clothes. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The walls weren't covered in fancy art, but in Leo's crayon drawings, lopsided suns, stick figure portraits of a father and son, and a surprisingly good drawing of a T-Rex. Their days started before the sun came up. Ethan would move around the quiet apartment like a shadow, trying not to wake his son. He'd pack Leo's lunch, first a sandwich, an apple, a juice box, and if he could afford it, a chocolate chip cookie with a smiley face drawn on the napkin. His own breakfast was a piece of dry toast and instant coffee, eaten while staring out the window. His first job was at a warehouse across town. For 8 hours, he lifted, packed, and scanned boxes. It was monotonous work that made his body ache and his mind go numb. But he was a good worker, always on time, quiet, and never complained. He had to be. This was the job that gave them health insurance, their only defense against a medical emergency. After his shift, he'd take a long bus ride to pick up Leo from his after-school program. Those 45 minutes on the bus were his only chance to rest. The second he saw Leo, though, everything changed. The tired warehouse worker would stand up straight, and a real smile would wipe the exhaustion from his face. Leo would run to him, full of energy and stories. And for a few hours, Ethan wasn't just a worker, he was a dad. They do homework at the kitchen table, build Lego castles, and read books until Leo fell asleep. But the day wasn't over. Once Leo was in bed, the anxiety would creep back in. Ethan would stare at the pile of bills on the counter: rent, electricity, and the medical bills from when Leo had pneumonia 2 years ago. The warehouse job just wasn't enough. So, 3 nights a week, after tucking Leo in and asking his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, to listen for him, Ethan would get into his beat-up old car and drive to his second job delivering pizzas. This was the job that was really breaking him. It was a mad dash to make a few dollars an hour plus tips. This was the job that got him all the tickets parking in a loading zone for just a minute too long, a rolling stop at a quiet intersection late at night, and of course, the broken taillight he kept meaning to fix. Getting his license suspended felt like a life sentence. He'd gone to court without a lawyer and tried to explain his situation to another judge who was just as unsympathetic. He was given a payment plan he couldn't afford and a suspension. But what choice did he have? If he quit his second job, they'd be evicted. He felt completely trapped, so he took a huge risk. He kept driving, his heart pounding every time he saw a police car, just praying he could hold it all together a little longer. But that prayer wasn't answered. 2 weeks ago, on his way home from a long shift, the dreaded red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. The officer was polite but firm. The broken taillight was why he was pulled over, but the suspended license was why he had to appear in court. It was the reason he was now standing in front of Judge Harrison, a man who didn't see a desperate father, but a repeat offender. The night before his court date was suffocating. A nasty storm rolled in, whipping the city with rain and wind. Thunder rattled the thin windows of his apartment. He'd put Leo to bed hours ago, but there was no way he could sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, the unpaid bills spread out in front of him like a map of his dead-end future. He knew he shouldn't, but he needed to work his delivery shift. He couldn't afford to lose a single night's pay. He told himself it would be the last time he drove on the suspended license. One final, desperate gamble. The drive was a nightmare. The rain was coming down so hard his old windshield wipers couldn't keep up. The wind was pushing his small car all over the road. Every time he saw headlights, he flinched. He was on a dark rural highway on the edge of town, coming back from his last delivery when he saw it. An expensive SUV was pulled over on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking frantically in the rain. As he got closer, he saw 2 people huddled by the car, completely soaked. His first instinct was to just keep driving. He was already risking so much. Getting involved could mean trouble. But as his headlights passed over them, he saw they were just kids. 2 teenage girls, looking terrified. He thought of Leo, warm and safe in his bed. What if that were his child on the side of a dark road? A groan escaped his lips. He knew he shouldn't. He knew it was a bad idea. But he also knew he had to. He slowed down, pulled over about 50 feet ahead of them, and put on his own hazard lights. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out into the storm. "You kids okay?" he yelled over the wind. "Our tire blew out, and our phones are dead," one of the girls shouted back, her voice shaking from the cold. He realized they were twins, both with the same wide, frightened eyes. "Okay, stay in the car where it's dry. I'll see what I can do," Ethan said, his voice calm and reassuring, the same one he used when Leo had a nightmare. The tire was completely shredded. He had a spare, but changing it in this weather was going to be awful. For the next 45 minutes, Ethan worked in the freezing, pouring rain. The wind was howling, and his fingers were numb. One of the lug nuts was rusted on and wouldn't budge. He put his whole body into it, until finally, with a painful screech of metal, it broke free. The girls watched him from the car, their faces pressed against the foggy window. He just kept working, focused and efficient, despite the terrible weather. When the small spare tire was finally on, he was soaked to the bone, shivering, and covered in mud. He knocked on their window, All right. That should get you to the next town. Go slow on it. Is there someone you can call when you get there? Our dad, one of the twins whispered. He's probably freaking out. Ethan nodded. Just get somewhere safe. That's what's important. The other girl rolled down the window a little. Thank you. Seriously, thank you so much. We don't have any cash, but if you give us your name... Ethan just shook his head with a tired smile. Don't worry about it. Just pay it forward someday. Now get going. Be safe. He walked back to his car, every muscle aching with a cold that went straight to his bones. He watched the SUV pull away and disappear into the night. He sat there for a moment, shivering, his teeth chattering. He was late, he was freezing, and he had just done something incredibly risky right before his own life was about to fall apart. It felt strange. It felt pointless, but it also felt like the only right thing he had done in a long time. Back in the courtroom, the storm outside was gone, replaced by the quiet storm of the legal system. Judge Harrison had finished reading the list of charges. He peered down at Ethan, his expression severe. This was it. Mr. Cole, the judge began, his voice low and serious. The law is not a suggestion. It is the structure that holds our society together. When someone repeatedly ignores that structure, there have to be consequences. Ethan's heart sank. It was just as he'd feared. The judge saw a file, not a man. Therefore, Judge Harrison continued, lifting his gavel just a little, with the recommendation of the state, and given the clear pattern of disregard, he stopped. Just like that, the judge's eyes, which had been on the file, lifted and looked directly at Ethan. The stern mask on his face flickered. A look of confusion, a faint recognition crossed his features. He leaned forward. The gavel rested on the bench. The courtroom went silent. What was happening? Judge Harrison took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a surprisingly human gesture. He put them back on and just stared at Ethan for a long 10 seconds. Mr. Cole, he said, his voice suddenly different. The boom was gone, replaced by something quieter. Forgive me. This is very unusual, but I have to ask you a question that has nothing to do with this case. With ask, crossed with ask, and 100 in man, in the sample in townen, and why, consented in, rate and why, and 100, and quote, and 100. 2% individual 5. Ethan could only nod. Were you on the Blackwood Highway last night? Around 11 o'clock? In a dark, older sedan? The question was so specific, so random, that Ethan's mind scrambled to keep up. The highway, the storm, the SUV, the two girls. A jolt of panic and confusion shot through him. How could the judge possibly know that? Yes, Your Honor, Ethan stammered. I was. Judge Harrison's entire demeanor changed. The tension in his shoulders seemed to melt away. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with an emotion no one in that room had ever heard from him. Gratitude. Last night, the judge said, speaking to the whole courtroom, my twin daughters had a tire blowout on a dark highway in that terrible storm. Their phones were dead. They were alone and scared. Car after car just drove by. No one stopped. He paused, then looked right at Ethan. And for the first time, Ethan saw not a judge, but a father. No one stopped, the judge repeated softly, until one man did. A man in an old car who had every reason to keep going. This man, they told me, worked for nearly an hour in the freezing rain to change their tire. He was soaked and shivering, but he was kind. When they tried to offer him money, he refused. He just told them to be safe and to pay the kindness forward. The judge took a deep, shaky breath. My daughters called me the second they got to a gas station. They couldn't stop talking about the stranger they called their guardian angel. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Ethan's. The pieces were clicking into place in Ethan's mind with dizzying speed. The twin girls, their dad, the judge. It couldn't be. "I was looking at your file, Mr. Cole," Judge Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "And then I looked at you, and I realized you're the man. You were their angel on that highway." A gasp went through the courtroom. Ethan felt his knees go weak. The world was spinning. All he could do was stare at the powerful man on the bench, who was now looking at him not as a criminal, but as a hero. The silence in the courtroom was now one of pure shock. The story had completely changed. Ethan Cole was no longer just a case number. He was the kind stranger from the side of the road. Judge Harrison looked from Ethan to the papers on his desk and back again, as if trying to make sense of two completely different people being the same man. Finally, he cleared his throat, his official tone returning. But it was different now, layered with understanding. "Mr. Cole," he said, "let's get back to the matter at hand. This file says you've made a series of poor choices. It suggests you're irresponsible." He paused, tapping the stack of papers. "However, character isn't something you can see on paper. Character is what you do when no one is watching. Last night, in the dark, in a storm, you showed your true character. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose by stopping to help two strangers. You chose kindness. You chose to be responsible for your fellow human beings." Judge Harrison folded his hands. "The law has to be respected. Fines can't simply be erased. But the law must also be tempered with justice. And justice demands that we see the whole person. In the tensionant. He looked right at Ethan. "I am not dismissing your fines for the parking tickets and the broken taillight. However, I'm converting them to community service. I'm sure you can find a nonprofit where your mechanical skills would be a great help to others." A wave of relief washed over Ethan. "As for the main charge," the judge continued, "driving on a suspended license, I see now this wasn't an act of defiance, but of desperation, an attempt to provide for your family. I can't condone it, but I can understand it. Therefore, this court sentences you to 1 year of probation. Your license will be conditionally reinstated, effective immediately, so you can travel to your jobs and care for your son. If you have no more trouble in the next year, this charge will be completely dismissed." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. For the first time in months, they weren't tears of fear, but of gratitude. He could keep his jobs. He could keep his son. He had a second chance. "Mr. Cole," the judge said softly, his official duties done. "On a personal note, thank you. As a father, I don't have the words to tell you how grateful I am for what you did for my daughters. You have a good heart. Don't let the world convince you otherwise." He banged the gavel, but this time, the sound wasn't doom. It was freedom. This court is adjourned. Ethan walked out of the courtroom on shaky legs, feeling like he'd woken up from a nightmare. The gray, stale hallway was replaced by the bright light of freedom. He saw Leo waiting with Mrs. Gable, his small face wrinkled with worry. When Leo saw him, his face broke into a huge smile. "Daddy!" he yelled, running and throwing himself into Ethan's arms. Ethan knelt and hugged his son tighter than ever before, burying his face in Leo's shoulder as the tears started again. He was a free man. He was a father. He had been seen for who he really was. As he walked away from the courthouse, holding Leo's hand, Ethan thought about the storm and the two girls on the side of the road. He hadn't expected anything in return. In a world that had felt so cold and unfair, one small act of kindness had sent a ripple out into the universe, and it had come back to him right when he needed it most. Life was still going to be hard, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the warmth of hope, a quiet reminder that sometimes the best parts of who we are come out in the dark and are revealed in the most unexpected light. What a story. It just goes to show, you never know how a single act of kindness might change someone's life, or even your own. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who could use a little hope today. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you?